So welcome to our Friday night reading series. We have a lot of special guests who are reading tonight. The first person that we're very delighted to have read with us is an alum of our program who graduated in May 2020, Ukamaka Olisakwe, and she will be introduced by Noni Salma. Frances Cannon will also be reading tonight. Frances is one of our creative writing faculty who specializes in nonfiction and poetry and illustrated art and creative writing, and has a wonderful book called Walter Benjamin Reimagined. So Frankie will be introduced by Shinyi Pai tonight. Next, we have Dave Heska Wanbli Weiden, who's joining us from Colorado. And I'm sorry, I have a little cat here who's trying to nip my ankles. And Dave will be introduced by Molly Martin. We're really excited to have Dave join our program. He's teaching a class on genre fiction and popular fiction right now during Module 3 of our program. So I hope for the students who are in the class, you get a chance to hear his work and see him outside of the classroom as well. And last but not least, we have Tavia Gilbert, who's joining us from New York City. Tavia is really well known in the audiobook industry. She is also an alum of the Vermont College of Fine Arts' low-res creative writing program. And she will be introduced by Amara Okolow, one of our graduate students as well. So that will be the order of events. I will introduce Noni first, and then Shinyi Pai, who is our new assistant director. If you haven't had a chance to meet her, she'll be jumping on the call via video in just a little bit. She will be kind of emceeing the rest of the night for us. So we'll do the readings first. Each reader will have about 15 to 20 minutes to present. And then in the second half of our evening, we will be doing a Q&A and discussion with the audience. So if you've enjoyed something, if you have a burning question you want to ask one of our authors, please feel free to do so at that point. So first, I'd like to kick off the evening by introducing Noni Salma. She will be introducing Ukamaka Olisakwe. Noni is a wonderful graduate student in our program, a second-year student writing a thesis on screenwriting right now. So Noni, please take it away, and thank you. Please enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Rita, and welcome everybody to this week's reading. Okay. When you first meet Uka, the three things that stand out to you are: 1, our unfaltering love for the Nigerian Igbo culture, our undying and palpable love for our kids, and our in-depth knowledge and passion for the craft of writing. Uka is not just a talented and spirited storyteller gifted with the delicacy of indelible words. She is an astute human machine who's not afraid to do the hard, painful work it entails to succeed. And I'm not just saying all of this because she's my dear friend and sister and countrywoman. I'm saying this because, oh well, you soon find out when I read out our boisterous and intimidating resume. You might even end up gasping, who the hell is that? Ukamaka Olisakwe is a Nigerian author, feminist, screenwriter, and scholar. She's the founder, editor-in-chief of Isele magazine and The Body Conversation. She's also the author of 2 books, Eye of a Goddess, and recently released Ogadima, or Everything Will Be All Right. Some of her amazing works have been published in the New York Times, Granta, Catapult, Longbreeds, Rattle, The Rumpus, amongst so many others. In 2014, she was listed amongst the Africa 39 project of 39 writers aged under 40. Also in 2014, she was listed among This is Africa's Best 100 Books from the year 2010 to 2014 for her debut, Eyes of a Goddess. She wrote the screenplay, several episodes for the Calabash, a Nigerian series that premiered in 2015 on African Magic Showcase. In 2016, she was a resident at the University of Iowa's International Writing Program. And in 2018, Uka won the Vermont College of Fine Arts Emerging Writers Scholarship to pursue an MFA in Writing and Publishing, which she graduated from this summer. And in typical Uka fashion, she didn't even take a break. She's now currently pursuing a PhD in English at the University of South Dakota, Vermont. It is my great pleasure to present to you Ukamaka Olisakwe.
Thank you so much, Noni. Yeah, I'm I'm a bit too emotional because I miss my family in Vermont. Before I moved to Vermilion, people were saying, oh, you're going to the Midwest. You have to be, yeah, this is a different version of America. Even though I've been here in Iowa 2016, I did enjoy my stay back then. It's still the same feeling, the same atmosphere as Iowa here in Vermont, in Vermilion. But the thing is that I don't have my family here with me. I don't have my sisters, Amara and Noni. I don't have my mentor, Rita Banerjee. I don't have so many people who helped me, who encouraged me. Yes, many times I don't want to cry. Yeah, seeing them again on screen, it's a bit too much. Yeah, so yeah, I'm a PhD student, like she said. I teach for divorce students. And it has made me appreciate what I do every time about story writing and storytelling and having conversations with these young people about my culture. And we have this amazing cultural exchange every time we talk about English composition. So, and one of the favorite part of my book that they told me that they read is the chapter 1. So I'm going to read that for you, part of chapter 1. And then I'm going to pair that with some part of chapter 13. So I'm being very deliberate about this because in this chapter 1, my character, my eponymous character, Ogadimma, sort of loses her agency. And then in chapter 13, she attempts to gain back that bodily autonomy. So here we go. 1. It was the early 80s, around the time a group of senior army officers overthrew the democratically elected government, when Austrian lace and ashoke were trendy and church services were fashion shows, and endless, shameless carnival of women in colorful blouses blended with expensive ichafu, which they tied in layers and pleats until the scarves were piled atop their heads like large plants, obstructing the view of everyone seated behind them. Everyone looked forward to Sundays, to going to church. Those who could not afford these processions snuck in very early for the children's service, because that was the graceful thing to do, to worship with the children in their simple clothes of cheap blouses over Nigerian wax and okrika shoes whose heels had worn out and made koi 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 sounds on the tile floor. It was on a Monday, after one of those Sundays, that Ogadimma walked into Barrister Chima's office for the first time. The room was empty. The fan whirled, scattering the papers on the cluttered desk. They floated to the floor, slid under the table, under the chair, by the door, and by her feet. She wondered if it would be awkward to walk in uninvited and pick them up. She knocked again, louder this time. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing. There was a click of heels. A girl emerged from the connecting door, her blue skirt so short she would not be comfortable if she were to bend over to get the papers. The name tag pinned to her white blouse said she was Amara. "What do you want?" she asked, her gaze piercing. "Your papers," Ogadimma pointed to the floor, but Amara wrinkled her nose, ignoring the scattered sheet, arching an eyebrow. "I am looking for Barrister Chima," Ogadimma said, bringing out the business card her father gave her, holding it up for Amara to see. "Come in," Amara said, waving her into the waiting room. And only after Ogadimma had gone in did Amara crouch carefully, not bend, because she could never bend without exposing her underwear, to pick up the scattered papers. When her father described the address, Ogadimma had expected a proper workplace, or at least a hall split into cubicles. She had never been into a barrister's office and so did not know what the place would look like. But this was anything but an office. It was a typical 2 or 3 bedroom flat, the same model many houses around the area replicated. Without being told, she knew that the waiting room was originally designed to be a parlor, that the connecting door led to Barrister Chima's office, which most likely had a master toilet. A small TV, half the size of her family's Philips black and white TV, was locked away in a metal cage knocked into the wall. She resisted the urge to laugh, because who on God's earth would want anything to do with that toy? Amara returned, but headed straight for the barrister's office. Barrister Chima will see you after he's done attending to the client inside, she said when she reemerged, an exaggerated air of importance about her. Ogadimma began to say thank you, but Amara was already coying away. She looked no more than 17 or 18, perhaps a secondary school leaver like Ogadimma, who was passing time as a receptionist while waiting for a university admission letter. A short, bespectacled man walked in and took the seat opposite. Ogadimma greeted him, but the man did not respond. Soon other visitors arrived, some wearing long faces, others tapping their feet impatiently after a few minutes. Ogadimma wondered what cases they were battling, or if they had also come to seek Barrister Chima's help with things like getting an admission into a Nigerian university. She opened her bag and brought out her JAMB result, 240, good enough to get her an admission into a state university. But her father wanted her to study in the East, so she had chosen the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. Nsukka was a place they barely knew. Plus, the number of students that passed the exams exceeded the capacity of a school could admit. So it was customary to go through people who knew powerful staff in the university, why they needed Barrister Chima's help. She folded the test result into her handbag. The room had filled to bursting. Visitors were sitting, standing, hanging by the door. A man came out of Barrister Chima's office, dragging a walking stick. He adjusted his glasses and made for the reception. Amara went into the office and returned seconds later. Barrister Chima will see you now, she told Ogadimma. Her skirt had reading higher up her thighs. The barrister was seated behind his desk, his head bent over a sheaf of paper, the room chilled to freezing point, the shelves cluttered with law books. Good morning, sir, Ogadimma said, and stood waiting for the invitation to sit. He lifted his head, a man not much older than her father, but with features so striking it was as though his face was chiseled out of fine wood, his skin the color of roasted groundnut husk. He waved her over to the only chair across from his desk and held her gaze with eyes that made her forget how to speak, how to move. She became conscious of her outfit, the loose skirt that stopped at her ankles, her cornrows that were old and fuzzy. Her heart was scolding hard. Good morning, sir, she said again, folding her hands on her lap. She could not hold his gaze, and so she stared at a spot on his chest. How old are you? He said. I am 17. You don't look 17 at all. She waited for him to say how old she looked. He didn't. Instead, he went on to ask questions about her visit, who sent her, who her father was. I have never met him, he said, his tone dismissive. I don't know how he got my card. He was speaking too fast. Ogadimma wanted to explain that her father got the contact through a customer who spoke highly of Barrister Chima, but the words were clogged in her throat. He was talking too fast. He was in a haste to send her on her way, or he was orchestrating this to make her miserable. She moved closer to the desk, her hands held out, and when she spoke, she could barely hear herself. Help me, please. I don't want to stay at home for 1 more year doing nothing, she said, her hands still bunched together. Please help me, sir. He was looking at her, his eyes unblinking. Ogadimma lowered her eyes, dug her fingernails into her palm. There was a knock on the door. Amara looked in, passed a curious glance at her before turning to her boss. Madam Afrecheta is here. I have told her to wait. She is crying, Amara said. Barrister Chima nodded, and Amara left. When he spoke again, his words were slower. I am going to attend to a desperate client. Will you come back by 3 so we can talk about this admission you seek? She was bobbing her head even before he was done speaking. Yes, sir, I will come back by 3. Thank you so much, sir. But he had returned to the sheaf of papers, her cue to leave. She thanked him again, furiously. When she walked into the hot waiting room, she was so giddy she almost stumbled, and she was able to breathe again. So I'll move on to the section in chapter 13 of the book to give you contrasting images of Ogadimma. Ogadimma visited Ejiro one morning. I want your mother to help me do something about Tobe, and then quickly added, but I don't want him to die. Can you help me? Ejiro did not ask questions, perhaps because she had been waiting for this day. Perhaps too because she saw the tired lines around Ogadimma's eyes, the thinness of her neck, how edgy she had become. She went over to the telephone to call her mother. She called Ogadimma, her best friend, and said, Mama, do quick before that man go kill my friend for me. It warmed Ogadimma's heart that Ejiro was her friend. She even smiled when Ejiro rubbed her belly, when she brought out the bottles of Maltina and bowls of jollof rice, and they sat on the floor of the room and ate and chatted. Ogadimma felt something lifting off her chest, off her shoulders, a dead weight that had refused to let her breathe well for so long. She was grateful that Ejiro did not ask what happened this time, that they talked instead about the new proud neighbor, the happenings in Lagos, and Ejiro's sister's latest trip to London. After that visit, she became less edgy and did not shiver when Tobe, her husband, glared at her. And the following week, when Ejiro visited and handed her a black vial and said she must pour the content into Tobe's soup, she hugged Ejiro and suppressed the urge to dissolve into a fit of joyful tears. It will not kill him, Abi, she asked Ejiro. I just want him to be kind to me. It will not kill him, yes. It will only make him sick. So what would it will make him sick? It will not kill him. So what will it do to him? It will humble him by force. Ogadimma stuffed the vial into her pocket without looking too long at it. Perhaps it was one of those potions she had heard about which turned violent men into submissive husbands. She certainly wanted Tobe to be less violent, to be humbled. The thought amused her, the idea of her husband washing her clothes and underwear and mopping the floors. She smiled a small sardonic smile. She would finally breathe well and no longer cower under Tobe's gaze. She might not let him cook her meals because she wasn't sure about his cooking skills, but she would make him do all other domestic chores. When Tobe came home that evening, her hand shook a little as she emptied the portion into his bowl of soup. It did not smell, which was comforting, and when she served him the food, he barely looked at her before he pulled the bowl for hand-washing clothes and began to wash his hand. She returned to the kitchen. She was suddenly unsure. She had made a big mistake. She was so sure that Tobe would fall down and die, and so she wanted to run out of the flat before that happened. But her feet had stayed glued to the floor. Blood thudded in her ears, drowning out all sound, so that she did not hear when he called her name later, and even when he bounded into the kitchen. His face contorted in anger. Have you gone deaf, or didn't you hear me calling you? He said. She was sweating. She wiped at her face and looked at him. Nothing seemed to have changed, not his manner, not his anger. I'm so sorry, my husband, she said. I do not feel very well. He stared at her, his brows crumpled with worry, before he said, okay, go and clear the table. I have finished eating. As she removed the plate, her mind was slowed with confusion. Had the potion worked at all? Tobe returned to watch the TV. He leaned back on the sofa, his legs stretched out on the table before him. This was not the demeanor of a man who had been humbled. A submissive husband would not ask his wife to clear the table. He was still very much in control, and as though to emphasize this, he turned around and told her, "Get me a toothpick," his voice bristling with familiar authority. Ogadimma's heart sank. The power balance between them, the power balance would never be skewed in her favor. She would never breathe well. She would never stand straight. After she returned to her room, she curled against her pillow and began to cry. She was drifting to sleep when Toby came to her door and told her to come to his room. She knew he wanted sex. That had become their routine ever since Ifeanyi fled with this morning. When she got to his room, he was already undressed. He reached for her. He pulled himself atop her. She lay so still, so tensed. She closed her eyes and began to count. She had only counted to 10 when Toby grunted. She opened her eyes and saw that he was holding his limp penis in confusion. Even she was confused. This had never happened before. In 10 seconds, he would only just be beginning. But he was done in 10 seconds, and both of them were so stunned by that they just stared at each other, their mouths getting in shock, before he rolled off her body and told her to return to her room. Ejiro called her the following morning. "Did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were going to tell me how it went down yesterday." Ogadimma told her about the 10-second incident, how flustered Toby had been, that he had lowered his head when he told her to return to her room. The 10-second incident happened again this morning, and he couldn't even look at her face. Later, he had sat in the parlor, shrunken like a defeated cock, staring dolefully at the TV. He don't humble by force, Ogadimma told Ejiro. And for the first time since things fell apart, she found in that experience a stirring, wicked pleasure. So I'll stop here now. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for that wonderful reading, Ukamaka. Our next reader tonight is BCFA MFA Writing and Publishing faculty member, Frances Cannon. Frances is a writer and artist with an MFA from the Nonfiction Writing Program at the University of Iowa and a BA in Poetry and Printmaking from the University of Vermont. She is the author and illustrator of a graphic literary criticism book published by MIT Press, Walter Benjamin Reimagined, as well as the graphic memoir, The Highs and Lows of Shapeshift Ma and Big Little Frank, published by Goldwake Press. A book of paintings and poetic translations, Tropicalia, is available through Vagabond Press, and a book of poems and prints called Uranium Fruit is available through Honeybee Press, as well as a book of poems that are forthcoming from Ethel Press. Frances has also worked as an editorial intern and contributor at McSweeney's Quarterly, The Believer, The Lucky Peach, and the Iowa Review. She has recently been published in Poetry Northwest, Green Mountains Review, Pleiades, Vice, Prompt Press, the Iowa Review, the Examined Life Journal, Edible Magazine, Electric Lit, and Volume 1 Brooklyn. Please welcome Frances.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me, everyone? Okay, great. That was so lovely and a hard act to follow. It's so good to see you and hear you read, Ukamaka. Thank you so much. It's really, I can't wait to get the book and read it. I'm glad that your students are responding well to it as well. I think that's what you had mentioned. They were struck by the first chapter. So thank you for sharing that with us. So I have several new projects always up in the air. So these, I'm going to read a selection of prose poems that are unpublished, but have been edited. So don't worry, I'm not going to subject you to too many drafts. But I believe that Rita may recognize some of these from our writing group. And I'm just setting a timer so I don't droll on too much. All right, let's see. So, while you're away, I swim over a shallow bed of zebra mussels, climb halfway into the heart of a giant oak, gain 2 slivers from an old rotten dock, and sample a handful of not quite ripe grapes. I visit an exhibit of paper whales, which hang like electric ghosts from the ceiling, pulsing with light. I read a short story about a little girl who finds a stone in the woods. Every other line reminds me of you, so I hold the pen close while I read. When I finish, the page looks more like an ink painting, saturated in blue scribbles. While you're away, I catalog flora and fauna specimens to document and share with you from afar. This is my love language. Here, a dead bat in the grass, its body transformed into mush by ants, but its wings still intact, paper-thin translucence framed by delicate bones. Here, a myriad of alien bodies, chanterelles in the moss, puffballs on a log, and a choir of backlit oyster mushrooms singing their spores into the wind. Here, a minuscule aphid with fluorescent green skin and spiked tail, bobbing up and down on my notebook as though he's dancing for us. While you're away, I find a cluster of glowworms in the dirt on a night hike. I scoop the moist earth into my hands and bring the light of these bioluminescent grubs closer to my eyes. I want to share this vision with you. Instead, I soak up their light and translate it into a story to recount to you over a meal of smoked fish and fried peppers. Tell me again about the glowworms, you ask, and I will, over and over and over until you see them in your own hands. And these are short, they're about less than a page each, so I'll just read a handful of them. Toothless, or trying to shake the existential dread while on a walk in the spring sun. Your daughter finds a baby snake in a rotten log. While you hunt for beetles in the log's remains, she plucks the snake out of the spongy wood, no fear in her fingers. The snake appears unresponsive. Perhaps it's cold, hibernating in the shadows of the early morning. As the snake begins to thaw in the sun and wake to its peril, it stares us all in the face in turns. Who is this and this? What are these fingers clutching at my belly? Is this the moment of my death? Finally, it opens and closes its jaw to bite, or to threaten to bite, and this is when your daughter drops the poor thing in the grass. It coils and bites, unfurls and bites, lunges and bites, but the actions of its jaw are futile. The snake is too young for teeth. I have felt this way all week, a toothless snake, between negotiating the meager pay and benefits of 3 part-time jobs, anxious trips to the grocery store mid-pandemic, and witnessing the horror of the news unfold daily, snapping my jaw away in defensive attack, to no avail. Those more powerful have already snatched me up at my tender middle, dropped me, and I lay half hidden, biting at the air. New one, Helen. I wake slowly from a dream involving spiky scaled parasites versus faceless scientists. Over coffee, I read one book and then another. Oops, lost my page. I walk my dog along the lake and listen to a radio program to distract myself from my own emotional discomfort around relationships, my body, the passage of time. During lunch, bagel sandwich in the park, I read from another book. It's midsummer and I'm starting to craft my syllabi. This is an older poem, it's not midsummer. And I'm starting to craft my syllabi and reading lists for fall classes, building, assembling, rearranging. On my walk home, I call my grandmother, who reads to me from Virginia Woolf's collected letters as she rests on the couch, her 2 dachshunds curled on her belly. She and I only talk about books and teaching. I don't tell her about my relationships, self-doubt, fear of commitment. All of our nonverbal conversations exist in the books that we read together. Marilyn Robinson for Crises in Faith and Floundering Patriotism, Virginia Woolf for questioning monogamy and sexuality, James Baldwin for rage and social critique, Margaret Atwood for our apocalyptic sense of doom, Mary Oliver for tenderness. I never have to explain to her why I do what I do. She knows, having built her own life around literature. Natural history after hours. Your friend has the keys to the basement collections of the Natural History Museum in Boston. He snuck us in after hours, grinning and jangling his keyring like the keeper of the city's secrets. First to the orchids, dried and mounted between heavy sheets of paper, each partnered by a hand-painted watercolor of the flowers, organs, and roots. Then to the spirit collection, leaves, blossoms, and seeds in bottles of ethanol. Here we found orchids, swimming ghostly and translucent, smaller than the wings of a fruit fly. Above the space saver cabinets, which slid on tracks like the ladders of an old library, we fondled seed pods as big as Sunday watermelons. Coco de mer, Michael coos affectionately to the seed, and I note how much it resembles a lady's buttocks, more curvaceous than my own. Finally, tucked away on the lowest and dimmest floor, the wood lab, where specimens of porous twigs hide like dark licorice in dusty jars. Jacob shoved a block of petrified cedar out of the way of his boot. Only, and he says, only at Harvard would we use a 3 million-year-old fossil as a doorstep. He opens the door to the stone lab, where we pour over shelves and drawers of carboniferous ferns and bird feathers. We spend so long with our noses in drawers of mineralized plants that when we leave the building, we sneeze fossil dust all the way to the bar, where we toast to science and wash the old stone ferns down with beer. The art and science of naming. Poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. Audre Lorde. Our hunt leads us through the marshes, fields, hillsides, in wider and wider loops around the Champlain Valley, and finally to a patch of morels hidden in plain sight at the base of 2 dead elms by the waterfront. 12 shriveled brain blobs poking up out of the grass, the ecstasy of the quest, the finding, naming, eating. We set a few aside to study and toss the rest into a pan and spread spoonfuls of buttered fungus on toast for dinner, moaning our appreciation. Then we stay up late reading scientific articles about the speciation of morchella, trying to pair our foraged fruits with the correct identification. We think we've found our species, Morchella umaria, though we haven't ruled out Prava or Cryptica. We dissect one of our specimens into quarters, scrape the edges with a double-edged razor blade, smear the spores on a glass slide, and take turns peering through the compound scope, one of 4 microscopes set up temporarily in this small apartment during the pandemic. The scope resides in the kitchen, next to the dried chilies and your library of mezcal, which I accidentally bump with my feet, sending collection of bottles into a little choir of clinking glass. Under the scope, the interior surface of the morel glistens, and I feel like a spelunker who has just discovered a cave filled with crystalline minerals. This midnight hour of fevered research is as delicious as the mushrooms themselves. Naming and studying is the reward of the hunt. And I believe I have time for one more, just checking. So I'll read you one more short piece. Summer solstice hunt. In the season of thunderstorms, we sneak away in a narrow window of cloudless sun for a swim. The weatherman warned us of an evening storm, and we recognize the ominous blue forming along the horizon, but it's too hot to sit or read or write, or I misread that. It's too hot to sit and write or read or kiss or cook, so we take the risk. I know a secret bend in the Huntington River, upstream from the hordes of families and teenagers and men with coolers of spiked seltzer, and downstream from the Audubon wilderness trails. We have to slide down a steep bank of loose dirt and last year's fall foliage to get to the water's edge. We arrive a bit scraped and scuffed, and we immediately strip down and splash into the shallow river. This is not exactly a swimming hole, more like a fat boulder in a stream bed of cobblestones, around which the water carves 2 narrow beds of knee-deep water. We take turns flopping like river trout in these natural tubs, then dry off on a sunny bank. I came equipped with a hearty picnic, and you came prepared to properly study this tiny ecosystem with your usual naturalist's toolkit. Glass vials of various sizes, a hand lens for examining the details of mosses and bugs' legs, a rubber tube for siphoning the tiny critters into a bottle, a few cloth nets for catching beetles mid-flight, and a fancy camera lens for photographing our treasures in scene. We set off, for our collecting adventure. Across the bank, I spy a nearly imperceptible flash of green, the 6-spotted tiger beetle, Cicindela sexcutata, my ultimate summer goal, flying just out of sight and reach. I wait for the beetle to jump again, and it obeys my wish, buzzing across my field of vision and disappearing under a rock. I motion to you to follow close behind with your net, and together we crouch on either side of the rock. I see the beetle perched in a narrow crevice in the shadows, and I coax it to crawl forward, millimeter by millimeter, with a twig from below. It complies, and then without warning, launches into the air. Luckily, you have your net ready, and the beetle flies right into the cloth. It's a beautiful specimen. We both dance little jigs in the mud. In the distance, thunder acts as a sort of applause or celebratory choir. We gather our things and scramble back up to our car to race the storm home. That's all I have for you. Thank you everyone for being here and listening.
Thank you, Frances. There's nothing like taking a walk with a naturalist, and it'll be a lot of fun to take a walk with you. So our next reader will be introduced by Molly Martin, who is a second-year student and former assistant fiction editor for Hunger Mountain. Molly will introduce David Wandley, Heska Wanbli Weiden.
Thank you. Yes, so I was thinking about what is the best way to introduce David. And I went to his professional development talk this morning, and no, I'm not going to tell the story. But one of the things we talked about was the phenomenon of the overnight success. And I think that is happening so much with David. Is, he is just phenomenally successful at this moment. I mean, just everything that we're hearing about his amazing book, and it's the overnight success that is 20 years in the making. So I will tell you, the first time that I had the pleasure of hearing David read was earlier this year. It was just after the pandemic had well and truly hit the US, and was our first Zoom reading at VCFA. I was wondering how impactful a reading could be when there was so much space and distance and technology between David and his listeners. But I needn't have worried. David's words captured our attention, had us on the edge of our seats or our beds or whatever. And by the end, I think we were all in tears. My first thought was, dang, I am going to have to keep an eye on this writer. At that time, David's novel Winter Counts hadn't come out yet, but for those of us who had read or heard his other work, knew what so many were about to find out, that David is a rising star. David Heska Wanbli Weiden is an enrolled member of the Sicangu Lakota Nation, and is the author of the novel Winter Counts and the children's book Spotted Tail, which is a biography of the great Lakota leader and winner of the 2020 Spur Award from the Western Writers of America. So see, 2020, there are some good things that have happened this year. Thank you, David, for giving us that. In addition to being a fiction editor for Anomaly, which is formerly Drunken Boat, he also teaches at the Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver, the MFA program of Writing and Publishing, which is our program here at VCFA, and the low-residency MFA program in Western Colorado University. He's a professor of Native American Studies and political science at the Metropolitan State University of Denver, and lives in Colorado with his 2 sons. So he's not busy at all, which is why we really appreciate him taking some time out of his relaxing day to be here with us. I'm not going to list all the praise for his book, but I will say, if you have about an hour or so, there are more than a few glowing reviews for you to choose from. So just a taste, Winter Counts is listed as a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, an Amazon Best Book, a Book of the Month Club main selection, and an Indie Next Great Read selection. But more than being a talented writer of crime fiction, David is an important member of the writing community who generously shares his craft knowledge and industry experience. His commitment to cultivating other writers has given me so much hope, even as our program is, well, we all know what's going on with our program. We're just a little sad about it. Please join me in welcoming David Heska Wanbli Weiden.
Hey, everybody. Well, Molly, first of all, thank you for that. Am I coming in okay? All right. Molly, thank you so much for that generous introduction. And before I forget, maybe make sure your adorable daughter is not in the room when I start reading. Okay, so just to be clear here. Ampetu Washte, Amachiapi, David Heska Wanbli Weiden. Good day. My name is David Heska Wanbli Weiden. It is such a pleasure to be here again. I certainly wish, that I could have been in Montpelier, but this pandemic, it's been something none of us could have imagined. And I'll tell the story, Molly. I told you not to tell it. So I adore my students. They are fantastic. They are fun. They are talented. I see some of them in the room right now. They are great. So we're having a lot of fun talking and learning craft. And, I don't know exactly what it was, but I explained that this is a true story. I was once knocked out by the heavy metal rocker Glenn Danzig. I was at a concert and I grabbed the microphone and I screamed "F you," and he just decked me and knocked me out. So I just want to say that to all the emerging writers here, I do not advise this behavior. I would in fact strongly advise against it, okay? So there you go. That I have no idea how that came up in a writing class, but it did. And so that's the story that I told her not to tell, but what the hell, it's all good. So anyway, let me just say a few other things. If anybody cares at all, I will be reading tomorrow at the Brattleboro Literary Fest, which again, I hoped that I could have been there in person, but they're all virtual. So I won't be reading so much, but I'll be in conversation with Stephen Graham Jones, who is a wonderful native writer. His book, The Only Good Indians, is just killing it right now. Stephen and I have already done a couple of events together. And so we're going to be talking tomorrow. By now, we're almost running out of things to say. We always have a great time when we do these public events. We talk about horror movies, Shasta Cola. He loves death metal. We talk about death metal bands. And so, so I think it's at 2:00 tomorrow Eastern. It's free, so Stephen and I are talking, but there are a lot of great people at the Vermont Literary Festival. My friend Kelly Jo Ford is a wonderful writer. She has a great book out now called Crooked Hallelujah. So anyway, this is a great literary fest, the Brattleboro Vermont Literary Fest. So really excited. On October 28th, I'll just continue to plug myself here. There's a really cool event that actually has a larger purpose. I'll be part of the Trick or Treat for Democracy team, October 28th, 6 p.m. Eastern. This is an event that was started by Reese Kwan. I guess she writes under R.O. Kwan. So Reese Kwan and Alexander Chi set up a thing where they invite like 10 writers and they just text among each other, but on Zoom, but they're signing people up to vote. They're signing up Democratic voters. So I will be on with Steph Cha and Lauren Wilkinson. They got some of the thriller writers, and we're going to be on Zoom, like literally texting writers in Iowa and Georgia, Democrats, and like, are you registered to vote? And we're going to read the funniest text back. I don't know, maybe this thing will be a disaster. Maybe it'll be fun, but they said, Dave, will you help the Democratic Party win? And I'm like, oh, hell yeah, So October 28th, it's on my website, Trick or Treat for Democracy. So anyway, I'm going to read a little bit from Winter Counts, although I feel really weird, thank you, having Tavia here, who is, maybe the best and greatest audiobook. We knew this even 10 years ago when she and I were classmates. And so I feel a little bit nervous here. My audiobook actually was just reviewed yesterday in the Washington Post, and they called it the best of the season, one of the best of the season, along with Tana French's book. It was read by Daryl Dennis. Now, what's weird is I can't listen to my audiobook. They sent me the file, and it freaks me out too much to listen to. And I see you nodding, Tavia. I don't know, is this common? Because just hearing somebody else read my words, it just freaks me out. I listened to chapter 1 and I'm like, no more. It is surreal. It really is. Now, having said that, Daryl Dennis is a First Nations Indigenous actor and comedian up in Canada. I understand he did an amazing job reading it. They said that his reading of Tommy, sort of the comical character in my book, said takes the gold. And so I really, now I kind of want to hear it in a way, but anyway, we'll see. But all right, so I'm just going to read 2 short sections from Winter Counts. Trigger warnings, okay? So any children in earshot, Aaron, you know, anybody, get them out, okay? You know, anybody who's freaked out by violence, I'm going to read chapter 1, which is somewhat violent, and then I'll read a less violent chapter. So there's not much a setup that has to be done here. Again, chapter 1 of Winter Counts, and then I'll just read a page from chapter something or other. So here is chapter 1 of Winter Counts. I leaned back in the seat of my old Ford Pinto, listening to the sounds coming from the depot, the reservation's only tavern. There was a stream of Indians and white ranchers going inside. I knew Gov Yellowhawk was there with his buddies, pounding beers and drinking shots. Gov taught gym at the local school, football, basketball, soccer. But word was, he sometimes got a little too involved with his students, both boys and girls. I was going to let him get good and drunk, then the real party would start. I had brass knuckles and a baseball bat stowed in my trunk, but those wouldn't be necessary. Gov was a fat-ass piece of shit with a fry bread gut as big as a buffalo's ass. I'd been hired to beat the hell out of Gov by the father of a little girl at the school. Gov had sneaked up on the girl in the bathroom, held her down, and raped her. The girl's parents had confronted the school's principal, but Gov came from one of the most powerful families on the res, and the school refused to take any action. The principal had even threatened a lawsuit against the parents for making a false accusation. The tribal police couldn't do anything. The feds prosecuted all felony crimes on the res, and they didn't mess with any crime short of murder. Now the little girl was too scared to go back to her class, and he was free to molest other kids. I'd waived my fee for this job. Usually I charged $100 for each tooth I knocked out and each bone I broke, but I decided to kick Gov's ass for free. I'd hated him for years. Even as a teenager, he was a mean asshole who terrorized other kids, especially Ayeskas like me. Of course, Gov had always been accompanied by his gang. I couldn't remember him ever fighting solo, but tonight was his time. The stones, gimme shelter, drifted through the door of the bar to the parking lot, leaving little melodic ripples like ghosts in my head. I lit a cigarette and waited for Gov. He'd come out sooner or later. About an hour later, I spotted him walking out of the bar. He was singing an off-key tune and stumbling. I slipped out of the Pinto and crouched behind his shiny new pickup. He'd parked at the far end of the lot so no one would ding his expensive ride. That suited me just fine. I could enact some Indian justice away from any of Gov's drinking buddies. I moved out from the shadows. He wore faded jeans and a t-shirt with a Fighting Sioux mascot. His eyes were foggy and he stank of beer. I could see the birthmark on his forehead that looked like a little tomahawk. Hey, Gov. The fuck? He squinted into the darkness, unable to pinpoint who was speaking to him. It's Virgil. Who? Virgil Wounded Horse. Oh, are you drinking or what? The bar just closed. Yeah, I know it closed. I was waiting for you. What for? Grace Little Thunder. Gov's face darkened. Ain't seen her. That's not what I hear. I take care of the Wakaneja. Show them how to be Lakota. Sometimes the parents don't like it. The way of the world, huh? I move between Gov and the truck. I teach the kids, help their families. Sometimes they want more than I can give. St. Gov, just a guy who likes to cornhole the boys and finger the girls. You know how kids are. They want attention. They make shit up. People make a fuss over them. The other kids making shit up too? I heard about you and little Joey Dupree. Gov tried to move past me. I don't need this bullshit. I ain't seen you out there helping the Oyate. From what I hear, you don't do nothing. You got shit to say, take it up with Principal Smith. I'm getting out of here. Don't think so. Look, asshole, Grace Little Thunder's family is nothing but trash. Her mom's a drunk and her dad ain't worked in 10 years. That girl is only 9 years old. Eat shit, what business is it of yours? I landed a hard body shot to Gov's midsection. The punch would have knocked most men over, but his massive stomach absorbed most of the blow. A Heska motherfucker, Gov snarled and he lunged at me. I saw the move coming, sidestepped it, and smashed him in the jaw. He shook his head like a wet dog. How the fuck was he still standing up? I thought about grabbing the baseball bat, then I felt a blinding pain in my side. A blow to the kidney, then another, this one worse than the first. Waves of electricity, neural impulses. Gotta stay up, don't go down or it's finished. Reeling, dizzy, I tried to puzzle out a strategy, but my mind was like an iceberg, slowly bobbing in the waters. You half-breed bastard, he roared. I felt his spittle on my face, and then I was on the ground. Shit, he kicked me in the back over and over, each blow a jackhammer. I tried to maneuver through the cloud in my brain. Gov panted, out of breath. He's running out of gas. Grab his feet, I thought. I snaked out my arm and yanked his legs. He went down with a thud, and I saw my opening. I stood up, grabbed his right arm, and twisted it behind his back until I met some resistance. Then I twisted some more. How you like that, you son of a bitch, I said. Gov looked up at me and hissed. Fuck you, Haffy. I had to hand it to him. Gov had some balls. I flashed back to high school when I'd been much smaller, not the big guy I was now. I remembered all the times I'd been held down and beaten by Gov and the other full-bloods, my angry tears, the humiliation still with me. I wondered if I should let Gov go, show him the mercy I'd never been given. That was the Lakota way, wasn't it? Wakantognaka, one of the 7 Lakota values. It meant compassion, generosity, kindness, forgiveness. I remember the lessons my teachers taught back at school. They taught that the greatest honor, the greatest bravery came when a warrior chose to let his enemy go free and touched him with the coup stick. Legend was that even Crazy Horse had shown his courage by counting coup on a Pawnee warrior, chasing him across the river, but deciding not to kill him, to honor his bravery and grant him his freedom. I knew that the honorable thing to do, the Lakota way, was to set Gov free without any more punishment. Fuck that. I twisted his arm until it came loose from the socket with a sickening crunch. Then I stepped back and kicked him in the cheek with all my force, snapping his head back violently. I took my boot heel and smashed it down on his face, teeth snapping like stale potato chips. I kneeled down and grabbed his hair. Listen to me, you goddamn scumbag. You ever touch another kid at that school, I'll cut your dick off and shove it down your throat. Hear me, Skin? He didn't say anything. His left eye was swollen and bloody, and his nose, seemingly gone, pounded back into his face. Blood streamed from the black hole of his former nose and mouth. How's that for counting coup, asshole, I said. I leaned over to see if he was still breathing. A few faint breaths. I saw some teeth lying on the concrete. They looked like little yellow tombstones. I scooped them up and stuck them in my pocket. Thank you. That's chapter 1. Chapter 1. I'm just going to read one more page here. Thank you. That's always a fun chapter to read. And so, by now I've read it a lot, and so it's just fun to read. But I'm going to read one now that I'm just going to read 2 pages from chapter 6, that I don't read this one a lot. The setup on this is Virgil Wounded Horse is a vigilante. So on Native reservations across the land, if you don't know the setup, Native women have an 8 in 10 chance of being raped if they live on the res in their lifetimes because of this really obscene law called the Major Crimes Act, which means that only the federal government can prosecute crimes, but they often decline to do so 40% of the time. So people turn to vigilantes, okay, for justice, okay? That's the setup of the book. Virgil is offered the chance to, he's offered a job to take out a heroin dealer, but he declines. But he comes home to find that his 14-year-old nephew, whom he's raising, has overdosed from heroin. This scene is he rushes him to the hospital and he's sitting and waiting to see if his nephew will live or die. And so he's sitting in the hospital waiting and reflecting upon his life. So this is 2 pages from chapter 6 of Winter Counts. Hours passed while I waited for Nathan to wake up. I tried to stop my mind from going to dark places, but images of my nephew as brain damage crowded into my head. I was proud of him, his intelligence and his curiosity, and his fierce defense of music I hated. It was breaking my heart and spirit to imagine that these parts of him might be gone for good. Then I started to obsess over things Nathan had done that might have tipped me off to hard drug use. Had he been acting strangely? Maybe I should have searched his backpack and phone. I gave up trying to stop this parade of images, and I just sat with my fear and guilt. The window in the hospital room was murky, like it hadn't been washed for years, but I could still glimpse the russet hills and rolling prairie of the reservation outside in the dying light. Back in the time before Columbus, there were only Indians here, no skyscrapers, no automobiles, no streets. Of course, we didn't use the words Indian or Native American then. We were just people. We didn't know that we were supposedly drunks or lazy or savages. I wondered what it was like to live without that weight on your shoulders, the weight of the murdered ancestors, the stolen land, the abused children, the burden every Native person carries. We were told in movies and books that Indians had a sacred relationship with the land, that we worshiped and nurtured it. But staring at Nathan, I didn't feel any mystical bond with the res. I hated our shitty unpaved roads and our falling down houses and the snarling packs of dogs that roamed freely in the streets and alleys. But most of all, I hated that kids like Nathan, good kids, decent kids, got involved with drugs and crime and gangs because there was nothing for them to do here. No after-school jobs, no clubs, no tennis lessons. Every month in the Lakota Times newspaper, there was an obituary for another teen suicide, another family in the Burn Thigh Nation who'd had their heart taken away from them. In the old days, the Ayapaha was the town crier, the person who would meet incoming warriors after a battle, ask them what happened so they wouldn't have to speak of their own glories, then tell the people the news. Now, the Ayapaha, our local newspaper, announced losses and harms too often, victories and triumphs too rarely. Why didn't I leave? People here always talked about going to Rapid City or Sioux Falls or Denver, getting a job and making a clean break, putting aside native ways and assimilating, adopting to suburban life. But I thought about the sound of the drummers at a powwow, the smell of wild sage, the way little native kids looked dressed up in their first regalia, the flash of the sun coming up over the hills. I wondered if I could ever really leave the reservation because the res was in my mind, a virtual res, one that I was seemingly stuck with. And then I fell into a half sleep, immersed in fugue dreams and transient thoughts, images of Indian children dancing in my head. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for that amazing reading. Our last introducer of the evening is Amara Okolow, who is the author of the novel Black Sparkle Romance, which is published by Ankara Press and the story collection Son of Man. Amara is a second-year student and the MFA Writing and Publishing Program Social Media Fellow. Amara will be introducing Tavia Gilbert.
Hi, everyone. Over the summer, I watched Tavia Gilbert's TEDx Ferguson Library talk given in 2018, where she shares the story of overcoming the debilitating pain that rendered her body hostage, of which she had to fight to believe to be restored. Today, that courage and essence exude in her voice and personality, even just after 2 classes this fall semester with her. She's not just eloquent, but possess a mastery of the author's voice that commands attention empathy, and utmost enthusiasm. Thank you, Tavia, for sharing your story. As a writer who deals with pain myself, you gave me a light that is helping me with my art. So thank you. 2018 Audiobook Narrator of the Year, Tavia Gilbert, is a producer, writer, and acclaimed narrator of more than 650 full cast and multi-voice audiobooks for virtually every publisher in the industry. She's a producer of several nonfiction podcasts with a global audience, including Stories of Impact, and is currently developing a scripted fiction podcast, The Ables, in collaboration with the BBC. Tavia is a nominee of 13 Audie Awards and the winner of 3 Audies, including Best Female Narrator. She's a 3-time nominee and 1-time winner of Voice Arts Award, and she has received more than 24 Earphones Awards, a Listen Up Award, and 3 Parent Choice Awards. She's a trusted and sought-after actress for work across every genre, from children's and YA to literary fiction, nonfiction, and genre fiction. Audible named her a genre-defining narrator, master of memoir, and Library Journal has written of this highly acclaimed actress that she is as close as you can get to a full cast narration with a solo voice. Tavia earned her BFA in acting from Cornish College of the Arts, studied audio documentary storytelling at the Salt Institute, and holds an MFA in creative nonfiction from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She's a faculty member in the VCFA MFA in Writing and Publishing program and a guest teaching artist in the VCFA MFA in Writing program. Please welcome Tavia Gilbert.
Thank you, Amara. That was really generous of you to spend time with that talk, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm so honored and humbled to be with all of you and to hear these amazing readings, this incredible work. It really means a lot to be invited to be part of this community, and I value it so deeply. In my professional development talk last night, I said, you never know if you're going to cry when you go up to do a reading, so just give yourself a little hand and always have Kleenex. So Amara, you brought tears to my eyes, so I was really glad to have taken my own advice. I'll read 2 short pieces. One is nonfiction and one is fiction. The nonfiction is the first time I finally wrote about what you'll hear. And it was within this community that I had the safety and was encouraged to have the courage to begin to reckon with life experience that until this piece I couldn't get on the page. This is called My Papa. When Mickey kissed me, I was just 14. Was it truly my first kiss? It's hard for me to remember. It's hard for me to remember anything of that time. I can only place it properly by thinking ahead to the next kiss, the first kiss I wanted, and then doing some math. Yes, it is true. When he kissed me, Mickey was 56, and we'd known each other for almost a decade. The first time we met, my toes were still bruised black and purple, the track lines left by the surgeon's stitches pink and puckered, the muscle of my calf shriveled and atrophied after months in a cast. I remember how Mickey had cradled my fragile foot in the palm of his hand as he'd fitted me for special shoes that only his store carried. I remember how I flinched, how he looked at me over the tops of his glasses, smiled, said he would not hurt me. and how when I was little, he hadn't. Over all the years I'd known him since, I'd spent countless cumulative hours in the Leatherman, the shop Mickey owned with his wife, Melissa, an eclectic boutique not too far a walk from my father's office in the basement of the Teachers Union headquarters downtown. A pair of Scotty dogs begging for caresses was forever stationed at the shop doors, which jangled with triple bells summoning Mickey from the curtained stockroom at the back, as they did that February afternoon when he kissed me. As soon as I turned a teenager, Mickey began greeting me with gifts: a round cake of Mexican chocolate, a leather bracelet with a blue piece of translucent glass suspended by wire loops, an invitation to lean against the jewelry counter next to him, close our eyes, and listen in silence to an entire song by John Coltrane. At least I assumed his eyes were also closed. One Christmas, the Christmas before the kiss, he had handed my mother a large white box tied with a silky green ribbon when she'd stopped in. A present he'd ordered special just for me, he said. Later, I slipped open the bow and lifted from the delicate tissue paper a green, scoop-necked, three-quarter sleeve diaphanous shirt and a long, flowing pink and green flowered peasant skirt. And then, overwhelmed by its beauty, I held the outfit against my thin body. I felt for the first time the potential of romance. No, it was not romance with Mickey that I was imagining. He was alone in that fantasy. Months later, Papa would sit close to me on the hard court bench. Though not close enough to make any physical contact. As the judge, the father of one of my schoolmates, ran through the facts of the assault case, I would still not be sure I had the right to continue to refuse touch, but would know for certain that even after months of therapy, touch was not yet bearable. When the judge asked my father to confirm the date of my birth, my papa would hesitate, then turn to me, his face blank, white, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "What's your birthday?" he would whisper. And then he'd smile or grimace, maybe reassurance or shame. I didn't consider then which, but flushed with heat, dropped my head, and tears prickling my eyes, quietly, bitterly, gave him the answer I thought he was too uncaring to recall. It would be nearly 30 years before it ever occurred to me that on that court morning, he was scared senseless too. I am propped on top of the clothes dryer, the ruffled neck and sleeves of my pale blue dress as scratchy against my skin as my white wool stockinged legs sticking straight out across the lid, my feet clad in black patent leather shoes. My blonde hair has been shaped in a bowl cut, one that prompts store clerks to ask my mother how old her little boy is, an inquiry that wounds and worries me, leading me to question, even at 4 years old, why I am not a pretty girl. A deep hurt that will nag at me for decades to come, or maybe forever. When my mama instructs me to sit still, I'll stare with grim determination across the basement to the Scandinavian wooden door decoration with its 3 rubber balls that bounce against taut wires each time the door opens and closes, creating a jangling cacophony of musical notes. But though I draw her delicate perfume in deep before holding my breath as she rolls the tips of my bangs under with the hot curling iron, still each Sunday I am left with red welts along my forehead and ears, where in her haste and anxiousness, Mama accidentally brushes my skin with the searing metal. One week, she grows increasingly frustrated at her inability to get the right angle of tulle and hair, and at my inability to stop flinching in greater spasms as she draws nearer to wield the curler for another try and another, until finally, my papa, dressed in a suit and tie, his beard trimmed and carefully combed, his eyes behind his glasses full of compassion, quietly, firmly, and permanently takes over as my stylist. How delicately he brushes the tears from the corners of my eyes, his little finger bowed like a cowboy's leg as he loosely holds the iron. How gently he combs my fine hair into the hot curling clamp. How easily I can breathe, even as he applies the searing iron to sections of my hair, holding the beauty tool as far from my skin as he can, moving around the dryer from front to sides until the tips of my hair are curled under into a girlish style that matches my Sunday best. My papa never burned me. Not once. Whew. I told my students yesterday, if you find yourself in tears, don't apologize. Say thank you. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you. This one is still dark, but it's not quite so. It's not quite like that. Thank you. This is a standalone piece, but I keep coming back to it, and I love Maddie, and I love this story, and I think this is a story that has a whole world in it. So. At first, at 14, Maddie was the greenest of the girls, not only in age, but in experience. Her parents had been involved in her burgeoning modeling career, only to the extent that they signed the exclusive representation contract her first agent put in front of them, signed checks for the waxer, tanning salon, nail salon, makeup artist, hairstylist, wardrobe consultant, the photographer, photo retoucher, portfolio reproduction house, the website designer, public relations agent, modeling coach and manager, and finally signed the release forms the assistant producer thrust at them the morning of her first shoot. Maddie had cried that morning after her mother had scrawled her signature at the bottom of the 8-page form, handed it back to the PA, then gathered up her jacket and purse, kissed the air next to Maddie's cheek and said cheerfully, "Call me whenever you're done, I'll come get you." Everyone in the sea of people behind them had known their role and performed it without question or hesitation. Technicians quickly hung and focused lights from a temporary ceiling grid hung in a parking garage that smelled of exhaust, while assistants organized clothing changes, shoes, accessories, and jewelry on tables and rolling racks. Makeup artists laid out cases filled with pots of eyeliner, rouge, foundation, false eyelashes on makeshift vanities. The rest of the models, a dozen other young girls, each indistinguishable from the other, clustered together, leaning against cement columns, smoking cigarettes, looking bored. "I don't want you to go," Maddie had said, pulling her mother's wrist. "Don't worry, baby." Sharon had tossed over her shoulder as she'd walked away. "You'll be fine. You're so beautiful." That was 3 years ago. By now, Maddie had learned how to smoke cigarettes, how to flick them quickly and without attention to the ground as soon as the PA barked her name. She'd learned how to ignore hunger, how to almost enjoy the gnawing of her stomach as it gnawed on itself. The most important thing she'd learned was how to take what she was given without argument or reaction, She'd accepted the ankle-length bare fur coat her personal assistant draped over her 14-year-old bikini body as she'd shuddered from the cold during a short break on a 2-day shoot for a vodka brand, a drone shoot that spread over a quarter square mile on an ice floe in Vladivostok. She'd accepted being lathered and rubbed in baby oil at 15, the efficient utilitarian hands of her stylist Michael running over her shoulders, down her arms, neck, and chest, and finally over her small breasts, which he'd pulled up and together and fixed in place with tape, the oil making her skin glow as she stood in a field in Sweden in late afternoon light, wearing a thin cotton dress unbuttoned to the waist and tendrils of her blonde hair escaping her girlish braids. When she was 16 and the shoot was for a men's suit line for an up-and-coming Japanese designer, she sat for hours under bright lights while a special effects technician slowly modeled her neck with made-up bruises, painted on an utterly convincing split lip, even added a bit of silicone that he perfectly purpled under her eye to better sell the photographic story of her being a battered but beautifully dressed daughter in a family of battered but beautifully dressed women. Then the only protest she made was to refuse the sparkling water with lemon that her handler placed within arm's reach. She didn't drink anything at all that day, didn't even smoke until she got back to her empty hotel room after the shoot. Then she went into the bathroom, lit a cigarette, drew in deeply, and leaned toward the mirror until her nose was an inch away from the glass. She stared at herself, her face wiped clean of any remnant of the long day's ugly makeup, stared into her own eyes, at the line of her nose, the sharpness of her cheekbones, the curve of her jaw and her chin, and then quickly straightened and pulled away from her reflection and slapped the glass so fast and so hard her hand ached the following day as she twirled a yellow parasol over her head. That's why Maddie sat cross-legged, her back against the cinder block wall of the basement bookstore on 11th Street on Capitol Hill, the designated meeting place for the young Seattle activists she'd driven from Los Angeles to join for the week's protests. As she listened to the organizer review step by step how to manage the boredom, hunger, and physical discomfort of the holding cell, when arrested, the activists could expect to spend on average 23 hours in jail, he told the room of attentive, resolute listeners, and they should be prepared to be denied access to a bathroom, for the cell to be freezing cold or hot and humid with the smell of so many bodies pressed close together. She thought she knew how to do that job. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to be arrested or not. She wasn't even sure if she knew if she should be here, part of a group that was made up mostly of young college students from Evergreen and Reed, organized by a man who, at 28, was the oldest of the collective of the activists, those who wore Che Guevara t-shirts and talked about being influenced by the Zapatistas, and whose mission was to successfully shut down the meeting of the international corporate representatives who denied exploiting natural resources, displacing indigenous populations, flooding farmland with chemical runoff. Maddie only knew she was there because she had to do something different. She could no longer just accept, without comment or feeling, the carefully constructed reality of the photo shoots in which she'd been a doll. She had realized this at dawn 2 months ago in Mumbai, getting set for a commercial shoot for a French shoe designer. She was dressed in a tight, perfectly white sheath dress, a diamond bindi placed glinting at her third eye, her red hair ratted into a halo around her head. She reclined on a plush lounge chair that was a spotless, perfect creamy white against the browns, blues, and grays of the slums that stretched behind her. Her stomach turned when the end of a silver leash was thrust into her hand, a peacock with a fitted choker around its thin neck at the end. A boy, a local, hired for a few rupees and the promise of an all-you-can-eat lunch at the food services tent, his dark brown face scrubbed clean, but he still in soiled rags, was instructed to drop to his hands and knees in the dirt so that Maddie's feet, in their $1,200 shoes, could rest on his back. She'd had enough. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our readers. That was really, really powerful. Thank you. Thank you, Tavia. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you, Uka. So good to see you. Thank you, Frankie. So right now we're going into the Q&A discussion portion of our evening. We have about 24 minutes or so. So feel free to unmute yourself. One thing I'd like everyone to do is if you could just unmute and we give a round of applause to all of our readers and to the students who introduced them. So please do that. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Excellent. So Shini and I will be fielding any questions you might have, or if you want to, jump in with a comment, feel free to do so. You can type it into the chat box or unmute yourself and ask a question. And if no questions, you're just welcome to give your response to the readers as well and the reading.
I feel so honored to share this evening of readings with you. Thank you so much. I'm really touched, and everyone has such diverse styles and themes. And so I think this was a really great blend. So I've enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Frank, when you were reading, I was listening and looking at your beautiful, beautiful work, and it's really gorgeous. Thank you. And it was, yeah, everyone's readings are just phenomenal.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for this. And Tavia, listening to you read. So over the weekend, I had a class with my professor, and we talked about Charles Baxter's craft essay published by Greywolf, essentially talking about adding inflection to your stories and adding a bit of attitude or adding a shift, a tonal, almost like modulating the tone of your writing. And I've been thinking about how to do that, how to make the mundane, make it interesting by the shift in tone. And listening to you read, I realized that I can actually do that. I've just been listening, like, okay, how do I shift this? The phrasing, even to use italics where necessary to add emphasis. And that was just incredibly beautiful listening to you read, and it taught me a lot, just in the space of 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then Frances, was amazing listening to you read again. I totally miss being your student. Thank you so much. I must say that it was the critical essay I wrote during my class with Frances, which she was absolutely amazing with criticizing, that got me into my PhD program. So I won't stop talking about her.
Yay! I'm so glad.
Yeah, the attention she gave it got me into where I am now. So thank you so much. And then David Heska Wanbli Weiden, thank you so much. So my new best friend here in I'm sorry, I'm getting really personal. My new best friend here in Vermilion, she is also from the Lakota tribe. Yeah, her name is Kali Rouse. She's amazing. She's been telling me so much, and I realized we have kind of similarities between my Igbo. I may have to send you an email much later. Like I told her, I'll go home to investigate it. Like what you call water in Lakota is exactly what we call water in my language. So I discovered all of that over the weekend, and it's just been like, okay, so how did all this transmigration go? Movement of people, So yeah, thank you so much. I just want to say, to blabber and just say thank you so much for being here. I totally miss my VCFA family, and I hope to visit you all soon.
Or we could all take a bus and visit you and show up on your doorstep. If only the pandemic was not here, we could surprise you.
Yeah, Vermilion is such a great name for a town. It sounds like a place where there would be some sort of big drama, happening in this small town in South Dakota.
I told Amara and Noni that it's like this. Did you any of you watch Desperate Housewives? The popular TV series of the 90s. Yeah, it's just the suburbia. That's just the scenery here. Totally. And the fall is as beautiful. I think finally I found the place that is in competition with Vermont when it comes to the fall. But the thing here is that it's so windy, and I don't look forward to the winter. I don't miss Vermont winter. I don't miss it at all. But here it's so windy. I don't even know how I'm going to survive it. But yeah.
Does it snow as much there as well, or is it better? Yes, Dave says yes. It snows a lot. Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted to say a huge thanks to all of our authors who read today. I mean, I think what I found so moving is there was so much exploration of vulnerability and still like an expression of agency through that, whether it was a modulation in tone, as Uka mentioned, or it was, a character wrestling with themselves, on the page. One question I think I have for all of you is, when you are approaching difficult topics or you're exploring vulnerability on the page, like, how do you prepare yourself as an author to do so? And what are the craft techniques that you use to kind of express the story you need to tell on the page?
Well, I'll go if nobody else wants to. So the hardest chapters for me to write in Winter Counts were the chapters involving the 14-year-old nephew, Nathan, because I am a dad. I've got a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, and it was exceptionally difficult to write and sort of put myself into the mindset of a 14-year-old child overdosing on heroin, because obviously I brought in my own experience as a father, my own fears and such. And so I had to get myself, I almost approach it. Tavia could tell us more about this. When I'm writing stuff like this, I almost use like a form of method acting. I have to get myself into the head of my character, but at the same time, tapping into my own experiences. If you were here for my reading last year, you know that my youngest son was in a school shooting. In his middle school, 2 gunmen burst in and started shooting. The teacher made everybody hide in the closet. So my beloved son had to sit in a darkened closet and hear the gunshots that in fact killed one of his classmates just 2 classrooms away. I got the call from my ex-wife telling me that there were 12 fatalities at his school. We couldn't reach my son on the cell phone. We didn't know if he'd lived or died. So when I'm writing these chapters, I had to tap into those feelings that I had, and they were certainly not feelings that I wanted to explore again, but I felt that for, the sake of being artistically and emotionally truthful, I had to indeed, experience those again. And it was the least fun of anything in the book, but I knew that it was important for me to face those. So that's just what I do. I'll shut up now. So.
Yeah, for me, so my story is quite communal and also very incredibly personal. So essentially, the book is about domestic violence and also about child marriage, because I come from a community where girls are raised or taught to aspire to marriage, that they can only be dignified in the community if they take on a man's name. So it's the culture where you either belong to your father or you belong to your husband. And if you don't belong to either of them, you are treated like an outcast in that society. So it's set in the 80s, around the time my mom, who married at the age of 16, and her sisters who married between 14, 15, 16 to 18, all of them married within that period. In the early 80s, I had to made that deliberate choice to set the novel in the 80s to get the feel of the scene. And also what I did on craft level was, because of how incredibly personal it is and how very, I really tackled really difficult subjects. At first, when I started writing the book, I did it in first person, but then I realized that since I am tackling really personal heavy subjects, I run the risk of making the story too self-absorbed that in such a way that the character will mostly just be talking about themselves because of what is happening to them. They won't pay attention to that feel of the 80s and also the political situation of that time that I wanted to bring into that story, because it's almost like in conversation, because also that 80s, Nigeria was in a very abusive relationship with military dictators. So we have a series of coups. So I wanted to also bring that out, reflect also what's happening at the unit level, family unit level, is also happening on national level. Just they are essentially mirroring each other. So if I told that story from the first person point of view, I run the risk of just focusing on the self without bringing the outsider's perspective. So halfway through, I had to scrap what I did and started all over. And I wrote it in third person. I did the closed third. So the camera pans really closely, and it's like this very small narrative distance between the character and the narrator. But then occasionally I would kind of zoom out, almost like telescoping, like I zoom out to include the current situation, to put the book in conversation with what's happening with Ogadimma. So those were some of the deliberate choices I made on craft level to reflect the political situation of that time. And then also something that I did, and most times when people, like I've done series of interviews, went on a blog tour when this book came out, and most of the interviews, they were asking me really personal questions about child marriage and all that. And something I wanted someone to ask me was on craft level. Maybe I didn't know all of this. I didn't know there was something called craft until I joined the MFA. And since then, I don't want to stop talking about craft. Like I'm such an annoying person to talk about craft with. But what I did, and I like to talk about, what I did with this, with the prose, is that when you read it, it's quite simple. And when you pair that or put it in, or put that side by side with my nonfiction, it's different. Yeah, I sound really different. Like I have a different voice when it comes to nonfiction, even though it's quite personal. And then this one is different, but I did something deliberate here. I wanted the languaging of the book to reflect or how literate Ogadimma is in the book. She speaks good English, but she doesn't use heavy vocabulary. She's much more simpler. And even in her dialogue with people in the book, you will notice that she's just a simple person who is unencumbered with academic language or trying to show off or using flowery languages in her dialogue, because she also has so much going on for her. So what I did was I made the narrative or the narrator and also the prose reflect her understanding, her grasp of the English language. And I also peppered that with the native language, Igbo, which we speak all the time. If you listen to Amara and I speak all the time, we kind of do this switch between the Igbo and the English. I kept doing that in the book. And also I included pidgin. So when you listen to Noni, Amara and I talk, we'll be peppering our conversations with pidgin, and then with standard English, because we have a problem with standard English. I mean, what standard? There's something like standard. All English are Englishes, please. So we speak the British English, not the British English, and then we speak pidgin, then we speak Nigerian English, and then we speak the native. So I did all of that. So those were the deliberate choices I made on craft level. Yeah, thank you.
Just a,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Frank. Just a super quick question, Uka. Are you writing your nonfiction in first person, second person? Which POV are you using right now?
Oh, my nonfiction is in first person.
Okay, cool.
I am so narcissistic. I'm so sorry, but I just have to make it really first person. Yeah, because I can't stop.
Cool. Frankie, yes, go ahead.
Well, I just was going to give you, maybe I've already given you this recommendation, Uka, but have you read the book Texaco by Patrick Chemoiseau? I think that's how you pronounce his last name. It's a book that, I'll put it in the chats, but it's a book that has such a nuanced and beautiful blend of languages, and it contains French, English, Pidgin, and multiple varieties of Pidgin languages, and it's based in Martinique. But I recommend this book to everyone if you are interested in the crossover of languages and the migration of language and shifting over time. And it's a beautiful book. But to answer your question earlier, Rita, I feel like everything that I write, if it's autofiction or memoir or poetry, it's mostly all nonfiction, in the sense that as much as I try to write fiction, it just, there's so much in this life that is poignant and tragic and chaotic and interesting, that I don't mean just my life, but this life that we all inhabit. It's hard for me to fully sit in the fictional genre. So it always comes back to things I've seen and observed. And then my experiences trickle in. And I've written a number of troubling memories, and my memoir was about my mom's bipolarity, her manic depression. And that was a really hard book to write. And it was a really hard book to publish, because then she read it. And then we have to talk about it. And the talking about it was mostly crying on both ends. And we have come to a good place. But it's really hard to write about your life. And even when that book that I am mentioning is sort of a memoir, but I had to write it in third person to distance myself, and also add a sort of mythological or fairy tale narrative and art. So it's like I'm putting a bunch of layers between me and my own subject of me. Layers between me and me. So that's always what I do.
And I'll offer, the only thing that I can offer in response to that is that I think the only thing that makes me write this is that I think it might help somebody else, because I don't necessarily want to. Amara so generously listened to the TEDx talk that I did, and that is the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life. And I've done a lot of pretty scary things, pushed myself out of my comfort zone all the time. And that was the most terrifying. But I delay and perseverate and, go through lots of layers of imposter syndrome until the final possible moment. And then I'll make the work. I should try to really develop a different workflow, because it's very stressful to work that way. But that TEDx talk, I knew for like at least 3 months, could have been 6. And I wrote it and memorized it in the 48 hours before. Because I just, I don't know, I like have to bring myself to the very edge. But then what kind of is always the organizing principle is thinking, thank you, that's very affirming. I think the organizing principle of that work is, I've been through some things that I think are not unusual, but the time in my life that I've been through them is. So if I can offer something, some hard-won knowledge that might not come for that we'll all eventually learn, the fallibility of our bodies, especially that subject matter. If I can offer that in midlife to someone who needs it, then I'll force myself to write the thing. My dad is in his 70s and he's struggling with some things that I feel lots of compassion for, the pain, the emotional pain of what he's going through. But I also think I already know that now already in my early 40s. I'm aware of what it's like to not be in control. So, and then I think other subjects are along the same line. So it's not craft, but it's sort of the psychology of the writer, I suppose.
There's a robust
Don't
chat.
read the chat, Rita.
I know. Yes, I heard some. I think I spied a writing strategy on here. So having said that,
I have a question for.
Oh yeah, go ahead. No need. Yeah, you go.
So this is a performance question, and this is strange because it's a question I would ask. I mean, you're an actor, so it's not strange. But in the context of the reading, what do you do for preparation in terms of being able to just travel and become and do more than just reading? Because to me, you become. So what's your process like? And actors hate the question of what's your process like. Do you like have like before you do like a reading like this, do you have breathing exercises that you do? Do you chant? What do you do?
I mean, there are those exercises. I read it aloud every day, virtually every day, many hours a day. So I'm just sort of, I can just drop into it. But I think for the thing that's actionable for any reader of their own work or of another person's work is to look at the phrase by phrase by phrase. That we're not reading sentences, we're not reading paragraphs, we're reading in phrases that encapsulate thoughts and feelings and images. And so moving from one idea that's a short piece. I mean, especially in the My Papa piece, it's like those are sentences, but each phrase had its own truth, and I didn't move to the next one until I needed to. I'm in no rush. None of us ever need to be in a rush in our readings. And so if we give ourselves time to be in the full truth of the phrase itself and give ourselves full permission to take as much time as the phrase needs to live as fully as we put it down on paper, then I think that can move people a great step forward to being present. I mean, every reading is like every piece of art. It relies on the presence of the artist being fully inhabiting the moment and not being anywhere but right here, this now. I hope that's helpful.
Great. And we just have 2 more minutes before we wrap for this evening. So if anyone wants to ask a question or even answer Noni's question, you're welcome to do that.
I have a quick unrelated comment, although it is a really great question, Noni. I don't have any answer because I'm not a good performer, but I have a comment for David, very quick, that my stepdad is Ojibwe, and he thinks of himself as what's the phrase he used? A phrase that you read in your chapter of Indian justice. He grew up on the res in the Lac de Flambeau reservation, and he definitely took the law into his own hands, and he served as sort of a border guard, but he made up his own rules and basically defended the reservation against police. So I just really appreciated that. He was a very violent person. No longer. Now he just like sits on the couch and watches Disney cartoons and eats Chips Ahoy cookies. But it made me feel nostalgic for the stories he's told, even though it's not the childhood I had. Your writing allows me to feel the way that he grew up. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that comment. I myself am not violent, my story about Glenn Danzig notwithstanding. But I do want to point out that these vigilantes do actually exist on reservations. And I felt a little bit nervous because it's sort of exposing our dirty laundry. And I've had some people say, look, this is kind of private stuff. Do we want it to get out there? And I did hesitate for a moment, but I think that for me anyway, and this is not really what you're asking or commenting on, but I felt that the good of sparking a national dialogue, if I can get that to happen, to get this terrible law overturned. I did publish an essay in the New York Times in July talking about the Major Crimes Act. It's a terrible law that is causing tens of thousands of Native people to be victimized, and especially Native women. And this law was passed in 1885. So I decided that I would sort of air some of our dirty laundry in the greater good of trying to get people to see that if we could get rid of this law, maybe there wouldn't be the need for the violence that your father, I guess, had, and that the vigilante in my book portrays. So anyway, thank you for that wonderful comment.
Dave, that is so subversive. I love it. Just, you know, I often think about that, the story behind the story, right? You know, what the intent of a novel or a collection of poems or anything might be, right? That is amazing. So thank you, everyone. I think that's it in terms of our evening for tonight. It was incredible having so many talented authors speak. It was so good to see all of the members of our community united again. It's been amazing. And so, you know, before we leave, I will just ask everyone to unmute one more time, and we will do another round of applause. And our next reading, I think, is going to be in early November, November 4th or so. So please join us for that. So please unmute and we'll go off on our applause. So we'll applause ourselves out of here. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Please keep in touch and
thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Amara, Noni, call me.
All right.
Everybody, thank you so much.